Good morning, everyone. You have to forgive me. I'm falling a little behind. We had a plan for today, but I have to tell you that I'd really like to talk about anything else. I really would. You're listening to Trace Elements. Again, Trace Elements Radio. We are on Revolution Radio, Studio A. We need to talk about what's going on in Canada. Now, I don't know if you've heard specifically this, but on one reserve, there were 11 attempts of suicide. On Saturday. And then Monday, another one. What we're seeing in Canada right now, we've talked about before, but I have to take you back and show you how this started. This reserve, which we've heard of before, has the De Beers Victor diamond mine on its lap. They were given $10.5 million trust fund, these people. There is connection to the neurotoxins, the mercury being produced by this mine, and the mental health of the people who live there. That is what's not being spoken of. What we are seeing, and this is global. No, this is global, but it's happening here. Epidemic. We are talking about the merchants of death. This is the corporate financed Holocaust that's going on all over the world, especially the Anglo Gold Ashanti. This is a mining conglomerate. Oppenheimers, De Beers. We will hear about a lot of things talking about this. Of course, the majority of people who are going to be blaming what's going on. We'll talk again about Jews. You know, Americans like to blame the Jews. But we'll pick this apart, piece by piece. Now, Attawapiskat has now been declared official emergency. Canadians are going to be talking about it. There's a big meeting tonight. They will do nothing because this is about mining. Canada has the worst mining abuses all over the world, right up there with the other ones. Now, the increasing number of young people attempting suicide, especially in remote northern First Nations communities, are epidemic. We've talked about this before, but this is becoming ridiculous. And we're talking about people under 13 and over 80. These are people who have multiple health conditions as well. Now you will probably say to me, there's a drug epidemic there, which is true. Horrific health problems there, which is true. But when we are talking about a home to around 2,000 people, and in March, we spoke to you about this Cree community that saw 28 young people trying to take their own lives. There are layers of grief, obviously. Whenever anyone dies of illness or old age, and it's a complicated grief, there's severe trauma, like when someone commits suicide. These things that are happening for a reason. They're happening because, poverty. Let's talk about poverty. Because the mental strain of living in poverty and thinking constantly about tight finances drops a person's IQ. We're not talking about just losing a night's sleep here. Think about losing a night's sleep or pulling an all-nighter, but for 7 generations. It's obviously these people aren't getting the money supposedly given to their band councils, but unfortunately band councils are handpicked not by the people, but by the government. Canadian government will never do anything to stop mining. That will not happen. If you think it will, you're deluded. Now, I want to go back a little bit. To something we had talked about years ago, and Chief Charles Tudog and I had spoken of this. We know there's a horrific amount of contaminated sites in Canada. As a matter of fact, there are more than 10,000 sites that the federal government calls contaminated that need to be remediated. I love their words. But they still need to be assessed, cleaned up, simply have a pollution contained, monitored. I have an article from, I think we first did it in 2008 and updated it 2014. Now, Environment Canada administers a program that covers a network of sites that pose risks to human health, the environment. The greater the risk, the greater the urgency for action. Now, according to 2013 public accounts, the federal government has set aside $4.9 billion for its contaminated sites. But this report concluded that because there are so many sites that have not been assessed, nor have they been cleaned up, that the bill is going to be higher. That means the government's total liability for contaminated sites is around $7 billion in 2013. So you'd think that they would be stopping, slowing down. They are not stopping or slowing down any of this. Now, as we had said before, and I need to say this again, many of these sites are located in cities. This is leaking into the drinking water. Other sites, for some reason, they call historic, like Kingston Penitentiary. Now, the Correctional Service of Canada closed it September, I think, 2013. Began decommissioning that in November. But what do you do when it's a city? What do you do when it's a reservation? What do? You close your eyes. Now there are 1,248 active contaminated sites in Canada that are being assessed right now. Active. Most of these are reserves. Reservations. Polluted by petroleum products, where the oil has spilled, where batteries containing other PCBs, other chemicals have leaked into the soil. Many of these polluted sites are in northern Canada. Risk to animals, polar bears, caribou, that ingest these chemicals, get into the food chain, and people who live north hunt. They eat them. Now, we go to the giant mine in Yellowknife as one case in point. And of course, most people have never heard of any of these things. Assessed at $900 million, the bill to clean this up. Two days before Christmas, Aboriginal Affairs quietly announced that it would act on most of the recommendations, but saying that not all of the pollution can even be cleaned up, and in many instances, which is a very broad term, means putting a fence around the site. That's our idea of cleaning. Or putting some plastic liners around the site. And then the process of ongoing monitoring for decades, even centuries, goes on down the road. And when they've seen the contamination, of course, they don't stop. They haven't stopped at all. So, De Beers. Let's talk about this. Because the Ontario government has not monitored the mercury risk that's going on everywhere that De Beers touches. In lands that were pristine, beautiful. Now, mercury contamination from De Beers diamond mine, one case in point, in northern Ontario, is much higher than the company or the provincial government has ever reported. This is a new study by the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Societies, Wildlands League. De Beers, of course, denies the allegation, saying in his statement, it's environmental data is often being misrepresented by other parties, like people who are dying from their contamination. There has been calls for independent environmental monitoring for years. For years. Of course, that's not being done. Now, the key concept is that an open pit mine located on a fragile ecosystem like James Bay lowland is contributing to the contamination of methyl mercury, a neurotoxin, by the way, that accumulates in fish and any other food sources that the people on that land eat. And not only are these people being allowed, well, they're not people, it's a corporation. They're being allowed to expand. They're being allowed to do their own studies. De Beers has failed to report 5 out of 9 surface water monitoring stations, which is mandatory, by the way. And for the last 7 years, these failures to report important downstream results. Apparently the ministry is shocked by this. Gaps in the reporting by De Beers are extensive, persistent, and this is what they do all over the world. Now let's go back. Let's go back to 2013, where there was unprecedented flooding reported in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, northern Quebec, and northern and central Ontario. Aboriginal bands, entire municipalities declared states of emergency, just like what we're seeing now. Now, due to location of First Nation settlements, they've always had problems because many have no roads going in and people can't be evacuated. Now, Attawapiskat First Nation that declared an emergency on April 30th, 2013, after sewage backed up, closed both the hospital and the school. Sewage actually going into the homes, and this was reported as early as 2009, ongoing without stopping. So many of the First Nations communities have a state of emergency firmly in process, not because of suicides, which is major, but because of the water, which we've told you about. Now, the Attawapiskat communities called a housing emergency in 2011. The Harper government and the De Beers Diamonds responded with 3 old trailers. Guess where they got these trailers? Take a wild guess. Can you guess? The trailers that were used in the United States from another emergency, and those trailers were contaminated. Yes, of course, I'm thinking of Louisiana. Now, then the government tried to take over the band's finances, stopped in court. Chief Teresa Spence, remember her, who began a fast December 2012, calling for Canada to honor its treaties with First Nations. Her under strike was only ended by the First Nations concerned and governments' promises to talk about this. In fact, Canada has become the third largest producer of diamonds globally, and the circumstances of local people never improve. And in other regions, corporations extract uranium, gas, oil, gold, etc., without any responsibility to the land's inhabitants, Aboriginal or settler. Now, for example, the Nesk Tega Band called a state of emergency April 17th, 2013. CBC gave the band, whose population is around 400. Again, there were reports of 10 suicide attempts in a month out of some 400 people. Health Canada refused the band's request for help for a drug treatment program, mental health counseling, and no one has discussed the lack of safe drinking water, which has been confirmed. This is not even a speculation. They know the water is contaminated. The water is contaminated because of mining and extraction practices. Now there, specifically, there was in Northern Ontario chromite mining. And a boiling water emergency. Actually, that one had gone on for 7 years in 2013. It is still ongoing. Has named 2 companies attempting to expand in the area at the time. So a Cleveland, U.S.-based Cliffs Natural Resources interested in chromite, and a Detroit-based interested in nickel copper. The band, of course, only has partial control of its finances, and know for a fact that the government will respond as with Apawadaskat by taking over, putting in their own guys. So, in January 2013, an interview with a CBC former Liberal Prime Minister, Paul Martin, faulted Conservative government's treatment of Native peoples and its attempt to legislate Aboriginal land without any consent. Well, they can recognize Canada's residential school programs as cultural genocide if they like. Government's attempts to create Aboriginal school boards, which is racist in its very name, throughout Canada, was abandoned, actually, when Harper's Conservative government came to power. This is never stopped. In Northern Ontario, the difficulty remains that most people are expendable to mining and resource interests. Anyone who wants the land is taking it, have taken it, continue to take it. Our people are endangered, but it's not just flooding here. It's the lack of potable or portable water. It's drug abuse rates. It's suicide rates. It's diabetes amongst Aboriginal people who are not eating what they're supposed to eat. Our food. The food from the land. We can't eat that because the animals are poisoned. Native groups have been engineered into situations of terminal health, physically, mentally, psychologically, mercury poisoning. Now, the resources of the land provide minerals, gems, of enough value to plan sustained care for, protect every single person up there. But because the resources are stolen from the people, the land doesn't sustain them anymore. They are vulnerable to man-made or natural disasters. No one admits that the European concepts of dwellings in common space apply to native people in regions of extreme climates fail every time. Natural disasters such as flooding point to the wisdom of migratory lifestyles which we had here. This place is not Europe. We can never live by European laws on this continent if we are going to survive. As a people, I'm talking about everybody now, we have to move. This is what this place demands. So European answers applied to First Nations needs with a contempt, well, with a focus on only making profit, while failing to provide a sound location for long-term settlement, which we didn't have because you can't have it on this continent. We have winter, we have changing migration, we have a lot of things that you can't do living in one place all the time. You can't provide proper infrastructure of water and sewage. You fail to provide communities with the means of self-sufficiency, healthy food sources, self-sustaining industry, employment, the ability to purchase food. So it is an inevitable result of Europeans' cultures, governments, planning, and funding was only going to eradicate a people. Flooding is a state of this land. This is why we knew to move. But what if James Bay region were populated by those in power? For instance, the land's wealth of resources and technology now would be available to produce flood-safe European towns on steel pilings with escalators to the front door, year-round gardens under thermal bubbles, which we have for communications, lots of bicycles. Brazil could create an entire city of Brasilia. Flooding is affecting non-banned communities throughout Ontario as well. What we have here, all across North America, settler communities and First Nations communities have been stripped of their inheritance, live amid the mercy of what's left. Cultural genocide against the First Peoples, it's a metaphor for what really happens in real time to all peoples who have to claim to land wanted by a corporate expansion. First Nations are simply the first obvious ones, vulnerable to the results of corporate greed. Canada's reluctance to change course for its people signals the intent of a crime that brings no change in the future. I know it sounds harsh, but there is no way around this. There is no way. You cannot survive in this way. You can't. This was never going to work here. Never going to work here. Not on this continent. It can't work this way. And of course, the greed behind it all. Canadian mining companies are doing the exact same thing everywhere they've gone. We are seeing the corporate takeover of this planet. That's it. It's not new, this takeover. But let's walk through it a little bit. This is a war that will not make the headlines. Not ever. And we'll go a little bit place to place to place so you'll understand what I'm talking about. 5 million people dead in the Congo because of a corporation. Now, going back in time, realize that this number of the 5 million in the Congo, 2005. For greed. Now, the story of war and plunder in the Congo is not completely unreported. It's a story that has been censored, manipulated, covered up. Plenty of information has been published about the war in the Congo. Plenty of this is flack, designed to white out the truth, forgive the pun, and help keep the real story buried. And that includes the truly honest representations of war and suffering in the Congo that have been published. Just because the mainstream doesn't cover it doesn't mean it didn't happen. This is the falsification of consciousness here. And while the death toll in the Congo over the past series of wars, for the Congolese it is a long, continuous war. We will never know those numbers. Statistically, there is no recounting the ordeal of millions and millions of people who have disappeared into swamps, into tropical forests, the mass graves, the torture chambers, the death camps, or after crossing borders. The entire exercise in counting the dead is another way, though, to do little to stop it. It's about profit. But that's not all. This is another one of America's secret war. Now, amongst the trustees are the overseers of the International Rescue Committee, one of which, the never-dying man, Henry Kissinger, man whose interests run very deep in the Congo. He is tied to Freeport, McMoran, I think it's called FXC. It's about copper and cobalt, basically. These are the administrators of the invasions of Rwanda and the then Congo Zaire. Same guys. It's about gold. And usually comes with the military-based conservation organizations like Africa Wildlife Foundation, Washington, D.C., backed mercenary activities in the Congo's mountains under the cover of some sort of guerrilla protection. Will we ever get free of these beings? I don't know. I can't see it. If anything, these are the true merchants of death. This is corporate, financed Holocaust going on this planet right now as we speak. Now we'll go back again. To this war in the Congo that has been splashed in world headlines, and same old cliches about violence and suffering are repackaged and rebroadcast as news. Meanwhile, early indications out of America that president-based killers are on the way. It's always been the same. Giant corporations are squeezing us dry. And they go from country to country to country, rapage, pillage, plunder. Now, there's a good article. Pretty good. I'll jump in. This world beyond the looking glass. Worldwide cults whose memberships always include the world's political, religious leaders abusing and murdering children. Social organizations, think tanks, news agencies, watchdogs, whistleblowers. People who are supposed to be helping, like the Red Cross, have managed to create a generalized feeling of hopelessness and fear from continent to continent to continent. Whatever we list first as endangering our survival, I don't know, planets crashing into us, nuclear war, disease, Marsification due to climate failure, inexplicable human behavior, clearly a global phenomenon now. This should be the center of our focus. And we are forced to either accept that there are people so inhumane in nature, capable of abhorrent behavior, not only individually, but within a subcultural community. Everything from terror organizations to business squalls, even national governments, that all work for the same guy. It's above and beyond it now. Secret societies? I don't know. People will point to demons or monsters or angels or it's one religion, not the other one, and these guys are worse than the other ones. But if we go through history, and we will go through history, whoever's in charge claims to be the good guy. Whoever they've just defeated is the bad guy. These corporations, let's just call them degenerate subcultures, if you will. They come under many guises. But to me, they are now appearing to be one. And there are no innocent little groups of the rich and the shameless wearing goat headdresses, dancing around a fire before a baby is eaten, or a cross is spat on, or before the summoning, I guess. To survive, to defend ourselves, we have to finally admit that these cults are real, that they have risen in power on this planet, and they are our judges, they are our bankers, they are our presidents, they are our prime ministers, they run the think tanks, they control the nuclear arsenals, these are the ones dispensing medicine to the kids. They decide what we learn, they decide what we see, they decide what we hear, they decide what we believe. And if you look at the world around you and don't recognize it as a work of a human soul, consider looking for something durable. It's something that matches this phenomenon then. Because it's become apparent to me that cultural patterns of, what do we even call it, denialism, a universal need to overlook, or simply to look away, are suicidal for all of us. In order to make this thing clear, I want it relevant to people on different levels of acceptance, of experience, even sustainability. Because we are going to need to use some care in how things are expressed. I am not saying the white people did it. I saw this picture that black people are starting to wear little cut-off Indian heads. Not the Indian heads, but now a white guy one. You can't win an argument by being more of an asshole. You know what I mean? What the European people have been sent to do was not their knowledge, because it was done to them first. When I go through the history again, we will see how it was done to you. Nobody wanted to be a Christian. Nobody wanted to be a Jew. No one wanted to be a Muslim. These religions of Abraham were forced on your people. Yeah, people are making the choice now because, well, they're stupid. And of course, we as a people, okay, stupid is a little harsh. We as people know that the divine exists. And it's all around us and it's in us. We like gathering together. It would be better if it was outside with a fire telling stories. But our basic needs, our basic wants, our basic desires have been studied deeply. Religion has come in to take over our spirituality, and it's done it. It's done it. I hear people saying, it's the Jews, it's the Catholics, it's the... These things are bought and paid for. If you have to tithe to something, do you think God gets that money? All of these ones who say that they are following one God, He wants that money? Does He? Do you think that the Creator of all things, everything, wants your money? Okay, the Creator of all things, who took the time to make all this wonderful stuff wants a sacrifice of a goat, of an animal, of a pigeon, of a little wafer, eat my body, drink my blood? No. And you'll probably say to me, but we're not Catholic, Tracey. Who made up Christianity? Romans. We'll go into it, and I will show you. Yes, there's a bunch of different sects, and they all think they're right, and they know God better. The Creator, go outside, look at that tree, look at the grass, look at the animals who are there for you to take care of. If these religions had any base in the human soul, one of them would have won by now, and we'd all be following that one because it was right. They are not right. Now, for some, this information is common. I've been told, and there are those who can tell and not ask, to severely limit what has been written and what has been published. Now consider this, in itself, a disclosure. That implies authority exists. And whether you trust or believe such an authority, real or imagined, and all such things one does not see, have to be continually examined, weighed, is something for your own judgment. I'm not the boss of you. All you can do is follow your gut, and there's no other reliable guide here. We are going to go for a bit of a ride, touching on issues. Non-ordinary reality. Physics. That they don't teach you in kindergarten. They don't need to teach you in kindergarten. Why? Why is there a kindergarten? Why our parents work so much that they take our children when they just learn to speak? Let me tell you why. When you're born, your brains are completely active. There is no right side or left side that is more active. The whole thing lights up like... It's gorgeous looking at a baby's brain. So they take those babies, force them to speak. It doesn't matter what language you're speaking. They've all been corrupted anyway. As soon as that baby begins to speak a language, that brain changes. And within the first 5 years, some of that brain is dark. It's like it's turned off. And then they put in a new reality. They want your kids. They've had your kids. And now they're going for the fetus. Now they're going for your eggs. Now they're going for your sperm. This has already been done. This is why there's so much mercury. This is why there's so much poison. They are getting you from inception. I'm not talking about conception where we're making love to each other, hopefully. It's not rape. But I'm talking about the idea of having a child. From then, they are raping this child. So we're going to be touching on the pedophile rings, the human trafficking, within the context of human behavior by these so-called elites. The purpose is to provide a reliable set of guidelines as much as possible in order to understand that What can no longer be explained as senselessness or misbehavior? Not when we are subject to, and even in what we are allowed to hear about, visions of unimaginable insanity and brutality happening to us on a daily basis. And behind the endless shelling of civilizations and citizens and the kidnapping of entire peoples now, the now officially labeled genocide of an imaginary ISIS organization. I'm going to be talking about ISIS maybe Thursday. The beheadings, the mass rapes, the rampage that crosses continents. It's now all over the planet. There is something more. There is something behind this. This is something that has been planned in Iraq alone. We know that not millions, but over 2 trillion in oil has been stolen since 2010. 2 trillion, carried by pipelines and trucks, then ships, but it never reaches refineries, never goes into gas tanks, is never paid for, never shows up in corporate profits and political bribes and money that never exists, or so we are told to believe. The looting of this planet, whether entire automobile assembly plants hauled away from Syria into Turkey, which we have seen, a veritable lake of oil, 2,300 Humvees, tens of thousands of slaves, millions, maybe hundreds of millions, 5,000 years of antiquities. The more loot taken, the more cash removed, like the 2.3 trillion the Pentagon misplaced September 10th, 2001. It just vanishes. It's magic. This is magic now. And people just, sit there with their wide-eyed stares and say, but what? When trillions more disappeared, 2007, 2008, when the world's banks collapsed, and America borrowed imaginary magic money to replace the missing, non-existent money already. Who planned this? Why?
You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Trace Elements Radio. In Canada, whistleblower who exposed Canadians with secret Swiss accounts got 5 years in prison. This man, called the Edward Snowden of tax evasion, gets 5 years for leaking records on over 106,000 account holders, including about 1,800 from Canada, in a move that led to billions of dollars in unpaid taxes being removed from countries around the world. Removed. To go where? So this whistleblower, Harvey Felciani, former head of a computer security at HSBC's private banking arm in Geneva, sentenced in absentia last Friday, convicted of corporate espionage for taking records that proved that the bank helped move the equivalent of $255 billion clients' money. Billion. So, my God, guys, missing non-existent money. When savings disappeared, investments vanished, homes became worthless, jobs blew away like sand in the wind. What was the reason? Because today, we aren't just watching a sea of manufactured refugees, perhaps accidental byproduct of conflict, but much more likely something else. When we take 2 million refugees, perhaps 6 million, add them to the 20,000 female captives of ISIS, aren't we beginning to touch the problem here? Entire regions of Syria have been flushed into refugee camps in Turkey that don't exist. People supposedly sold at auctions, peddled on eBay, people who have disappeared. But as with endless millions of tons of crude oil, they are never seen again. They are not in the refugee camps, not in the sweatshops, or even in the brothels of London, Kiev, Tel Aviv. They can't all be on the slave ships that are sending the natives from Canada to the United States. But let's look at the United States. Let's go back to the 80s in just a random time we could document based on a branded scandal. So often we have written of American military and its move towards extremism. This move in the military, one that has sickened those of a genuine spirit, a warrior spirit, a soldier. That's where the word comes from. And such people do exist, I still believe. Isn't simply an apocalypse worship here, speaking in tongues and adherence to the teachings of some moronic, big-headed, racketeering TV evangelist. Calling this a cult is an oversimplification. Do you feel like someone is staging it all? The entire system, the economics that make no sense, the nations that only serve invisible masters, wars not fought, not started, but staged. Isn't it all like we are performing for the amusement of something perverse? We don't see death like this in Canada. And I realize because I'm up here, Great White North and all, so a couple of events that need a response. Murders. Murders beyond any reasonable explanation. Like Scalia, for one. We've been pushed to begin examining pedophile rings operating in Europe this time. And within many groups, defense contractors, there are fields of investigators specializing in trafficking. Months ago, physicist Cash brought us a complex and frankly disjointed story of experiences coming across a pedophile ring involving royal families of Belgium and Netherlands, how their activities are tied to individuals in the U.S., Sterling Allen, now awaiting trial, but moreover into Europe and defense and scientific communities as well. We've spoken about the issues in Belgium and the Netherlands many times, and how this was a landing zone for child trafficking, sex trafficking, according to the UN and Interpol and the U.S. State Department we have gotten to know Cash with his new physics, free energy technologies, initially seen by many as a cult, still talked about this today. It's attracted attention from all over the world: Russia, China, European groups within intelligence agencies checking him out. But this is where it gets sticky. It's not just MI5 or 6, but rather rogue and affiliated groups tied to what I will describe as fringe. Freemasonry, if you will, but that isn't even the best category for it. So I will also apologize to Freemasons for the use of this term, because not all Freemasons are like this. Like, not all Christians are bad, not all Muslims are bad, not all anybody is bad. Not all. But the ones in control? Oh yeah. So I could spend not just months, but years discussing Freemasonry as a social organization, or as in Britain, sometimes a cult, sometimes doing great things, sometimes penetrating, Scotland Yard and the police, especially here, RCMP, security agencies, once threatening British security, Canadian security, covering up pedophile rings that continue to rule in Britain, in the United States, in Canada, all over the world. The Murdoch press organization that I've talked about through wiretapping was able to advance Israeli influence in Britain, leveraging evidence, tying Downing Street and the palace to these things. This led to minor public house clearing, I guess. Few aged celebrities and poor aging monsters like Janner thrown to the wolves during the last hours of their lives, as though 3 consecutive younger generations hadn't long stepped into their shoes, enjoying this full protection. So this is what Cash stepped into. This, and the Washington Kenneth Todd describes within, which he is willing to tell the public, or what Jim Hankey describes during his years at the Pentagon, a word I speak of in an equally limited way. What we have found to be going on in Canada with the disappearing children, we have found with the refugees who sign in and never land anywhere, and they're usually women and children. Let's take an anecdotal look at Franklin, because you see, every scandal is expanded, fictionalized, subject to the Alex Jones treatment, until it's poisoned to the point that no mainstream journalist, no prosecutor, no investigative agency will look at it again. No one in their right mind would believe this sort of thing. The children are disappearing from all over the world, and women are being taken from their homes in bed. To go where? Nowhere. And disclosures are seeded, of course, with lies in order to kill the investigation. Often agencies themselves take part, using terms conspiracy theories as an excuse to not look. So when solid evidence came to the FBI that children from famous, do you remember Father Flanagan's Boys Town in Nebraska? These people were being trafficked to parties of Washington, D.C. It became a joke, a fiction. It just disappeared. So back to Kesh. Kesh came with solid proof that Sterling Allen, working through an elite group in Belgium, was operating inside of the free energy community, online, recruiting children through sex trafficking. And I'll tell you of another story in Canada that just came out. That your children, who you are allowing on Facebook to talk to strangers, are being targeted. More than targeted. Taught. Tested. Passed around. Do you put your kids' pictures, your young children's pictures, on Facebook? Of course you do. You think, it's fun. People are passing those things around. Facebook is dangerous. I use it too, don't get me wrong. But it's not a place that I would let a young child go on alone. Ever. Now, he has presented, Kesh, a wealth of solid evidence, videos, emails, more, that a network existed that tied new age types, not only to online recruiting, but to NGOs working in South and Central America and Africa, in the Middle East. We've talked about organizations that are running schools and orphanages, Palestinian scholarships, for one, that help for abused or displaced mothers from Lebanon to Morocco to Mexico and Brazil, all involved stealing children. We have found people in Haiti coming in, taking those children, working under the cloak of the Red Cross. We should have known what the Red Cross meant. Now these groups plant themselves near the camps in the Middle East, preying on poor people, Palestinians working with ISIS, to traffic Syrian and Iraqi children and Shiites and natives and brown people, and not just brown people. You know that northern Middle East have a love of your blue-eyed boys, but with full support of Turkish organized crime, suspected complicity with their intelligence agencies, political leadership as well. We have traced many to Syria. Now, veterans today, they met with the Minister of Justice, Syria, found himself deeply frustrated how many powerful friends human traffickers seem to have. They were able to tie both the U.S. and the Saudi embassies. And I told you the House of Saud was going to come big this year. Now, the embassies in Beirut, of course, along with a series of NGOs operating in the Ukraine, in Romania, in Macedonia, in Turkey, in the Congo, working side by side with al-Nusra and ISIS, into Iraq and Syria, anywhere the mining companies go. Now, they won't talk to you about this at Veterans today. Cuts too close to home. But where they are extracting minerals and resources, they are extracting your kids. Aid workers, journalists move freely through these areas, some representing Syrian Human Resources Observatory, so they say, names such as that. Other newspapers such as the UK Independent or online blogs tied to Israeli or CIA or MI6 funding or CSIS. Similar meetings with governments in Africa. Not one or two, all confronted powerful economic and political groups that are clearly behind human trafficking. So in August 2015, they arranged for Kesh to meet with an FBI in Rome to hand over the evidence. As many now know, computers seized on January 15, 2016 by the FBI, by an agent, Jeff Ross, in Salt Lake City, Utah, contained files that listed high-level clients. Details of their preferences, and enough to secure a kind of protection we had been seeing in Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Nigeria, Morocco, Turkey, Belgium, Britain, Ireland, and the United States. Because somebody clearly has a preference for the Irish. So the information that came out on veterans today was that Justice Scalia of the U.S. Supreme Court, who was protecting Sterling Allen despite nearly 2 years of him doing everything imaginable to be arrested, was confirmed. Their report on Scalia's murder at the hands of a secret society tied to Bohemian Grove and satanic cults and such was also confirmed, and was their information that only after Scalia's death could Sterling Allen be arrested. So we've seen the spin that has been tied to move what is solid evidence into a conspiracy theory, so it will just go away through wild misrepresentations of Scalia-Obama meetings, or blaming Obama personally for a pillow over the face, suffocation, killing, partial confirmation as well, particularly as we show sources of these fabrications and put them into the midst of Washington's pedophilic sewer. So we catch a flurry of internet troll activity, especially attacking Kesh by associates of Sterling Allen, but many more. I hear that a lot. You can trace the origins of at least one group that began with a left-handed confession that we are not pedophiles. We took a look, okay, more than a look, and then you come to a group in Morocco with minor petty history. Well, petty internet fraud, bizarre new age tale spinning that landed a gig running an orphanage that was quickly cited as a way station for human traffickers. Come, take your pick. So, as they so often say, they are unable to comment more on any kind of ongoing investigation. So thus far, Kesh has been willing to name names of those who are involved and only at a very real risk, much more risk than an army of trolls and child traffickers pouring out lies. Thus, we use more direct evidence, put it that way, things we personally have seen. Now, this is from Veterans Today, with the best sources possible, working through existing narratives, paying close attention to how stories are poisoned, how investigations are squashed, but moreover, how things tie together. This is new territory. What I'm forced to explain is abhorrent human behavior. Now, going back to 2000, a criminal cabal overthrows the U.S. government through the Supreme Court. Monsanto is completely in charge of your Supreme Court now. They don't say this at Veterans Today, but if you want me to go into this at another time, I will. But they have been able to establish, partly at least, 5 judges of the 9 that supported this move against the corporation. At least 3 members are secret societies, minimally considered satanic. Well, Monsanto, yeah, I'm saying, yeah, they're messing with our DNA. That's not good. So, can only assume that 2 others are influenced in some way to take part in a group, assured that Al Gore would be silenced, that news media would play along, as they do since they're owned by the cabal. Now, clearly under the promise that America would begin a series of wars on behalf, they say, Israel. Now, Veterans Today is big against Israel, but never mentions that America helped create it. But it's in charge of a lot in the background, even though a lot of, well, most of the people who are in Israel right now that are controlling it are European, and the majority of them are, drumroll please, Polish, rich, part of the royalty from Europe. But that's okay. I don't blame Europeans for this. I don't blame the Khazarians for this. I don't. It's a few, I don't know, follow the money, few rich white guys doing this. And of course, it's not only rich white men doing this. Look at Africa. Africa, who sometimes, people may think that I'm all like, go Africa. No, they are mutilating their girls there for religion's names. Mutilating them so horribly. They are terrified of men and still feel the need to marry one, even though their genitals are horrifically scarred. Sex would be a re-traumatization every time you do it. And they beat them in the chest as children too, so they won't have women's breasts when they grow up. Yeah, at this point I'm leaning towards, let's burn everything to the ground and just start again. So, here, years later, the same groups that run children out of Africa and the Middle East and Canada now peddle wild rumors about 9/11 and poisoning even a 15-year-old event, now entering America's memory banks of horrors, along with the Kennedy murders that are now in our global consciousness, of course. Now here's the crux. We have to come to grips with the denial. We collectively believe in politics, in governments, in the pictures we see, in the narratives created for our amusement. Almost as though we are the mindless politicians that they hire as actors, no more than that. When you see ISIS with their shiploads of new trucks from America, all dressed, well, their captives are all dressed in American prison garb. Same little jumpsuits. Or Boko Haram, the great haters of technology, barefoot with their satellite phones. And no one asks, who paid for those Toyota? Whose platinum card picks up the sat phone bill? We are no better than those we subsidize to lie to us. And let's look at Scalia and at the St. Hubertus group, a subset. We are all informed of the Bohemian Grove, this secret society, all up in your face. We know that those involved are selected, not just money and power, but their history of moral flexibility, a love of power, combined with mediocre, at best, intellect, physical cowardice, delusions of somehow being special, because every group who takes over control somehow thinks they are the chosen ones. They are special. Do you want to go to the island? So we have at least established a baseline for what is normal. Dirty sex fantasies, debasement, various forms of self-loathing, simple hedonism have always been part of the human condition, and signs of these drives, or the potential for these drives, may well exist in many, possibly most of us. We're a little kinky, but there's a difference here. Not everyone acts on these things. Even though these things are pushed in our face all the time, we are shown these images so we be like this. So acting on this, most are restrained by a moral compass. Even though that's been almost beat out of us. And yes, some with a religious belief or common sense or a subject of cultural and social examination. But we have the other stuff. A drive for sexual gratification is one thing. Our literature, our television, our films obsess with the idea of sexual violence. Sexuality and violence, which we've talked about before, in greater and greater quantities are being handed to us, served on a silver platter, and particularly when it applies to serial killings and serial killers. Our heroes now. There seems to be a new love amongst those who decide on our mass media entrainment for depicting debasement, the slaughter of women, young, sometimes very young, children, all instantly objectified, then cut down somehow, presented to the audience as a wasted commodity. Could have toyed with that child for months. Why did they have to kill it off all at once? Now picture yourself invited to join some select group, a club, a cult, told that you are special, you are designated, you are the elect. Now, this isn't a street gang as depicted on television, where you have to kill an innocent bystander to earn your street cred, or is in very real life. How when taking a position with law enforcement agency, joining Congress, or even a state legislator, you are blind, photoed, snorting coke, or prone call girl, or a boy that you've rented. That was old politics. Long since not enough. Not meeting what is expected. So here's the story. Years ago, not quite 30, talking with a former Jesuit named Malachi Martin. Gotten to know Friar Martin while working in New York. Not me, of course. Martin had been working in the Vatican, had been forced out by what he called satanic cabal amongst the Jesuits, but they do follow the Dark Father and give allegiance to him. But again, in these groups, not everyone knows everything, and why would they read? Now, he claimed that he had been in contact with demonic entities, believe it or not, had consecrated the Holy See in the name of Satan after receiving proof of a manifestation of the power of evil. Now, physically happened to him? I wasn't there. But Martin said they cut a deal, were given promises, some very material in nature. According to Martin, the rewards reaped by the Jesuits were material as well. That relationship involved participating in ceremonies as depicted in not only dozens of films, but in ancient carvings as well. Human sacrifice, killing of children, often newborn infants, dancing, chanting, incarnations wearing headdresses depicting something horned. These Vatican rites that Martin makes reference to in Windswept House and his other best-selling books are also innocent ceremonies of Bohemian Grove, or Hubitus, or the yearly get-togethers at Solstice in Denver, or at the Rothschilds compound on Corfu. Martin said this of the Jesuits: they simply tried Christianity and tired of it. The unanswered prayers. They sought another voice on the end of the phone, and such a voice was there waiting for them. And the church of today is what it is based on them abandoning God. Not on a loss of faith, but on God's unwillingness to meet their price. As a real creator of everything would. He would have no need for a little sacrifices or a little stuff or a little tithing, because he made everything. Why would he need it? So apparently this Martin saw things within the definitions of good and evil, within the litany of the church and its rituals and its history and its traditions, particularly the rite of exorcism, something that he had performed hundreds of times. What we have to ask ourselves is what we are willing to believe. And if what we don't believe is because we don't know, or because we simply don't care, Is Skull and Bones such a group? My answer would be yes, of course. Whether the supernatural is real or not, one must note that all religions, all faiths, is a belief in the supernatural, real or otherwise, implied or otherwise. And the difference between entities and their purpose is only the difference between light and dark. One stick, different ends. So is there a difference between Christian evangelist to medic Zionist? Who crosses the line? Who crosses it how much? If these Jesuits worship Lucifer, a fallen angel, we are told, perhaps bringing on decades of worldwide abuse of children, hundreds of cases, hundreds of thousands, millions, uncounted deaths covered up. And we're one to look at a map, conflict upon conflict, driven by the unholy three, rogue offshoots of a religion, the religions of the book. Is there a synopsis? I would say there is. I'm going to present you as such as we go on. It is an old marriage, neocon Bolsheviks and Christian evangelists working hand in hand with what we call the Illuminati. Share a commonality, a love of evil, Ferengi style, a deal with the devil, a suffering, an entropy, a decline, a debasement, a sea of lies, of hate, of cruelty, of greed, amongst greed above all. It builds to, I think, an inevitable end. Is this what we're seeing right now? So as I promised you a story, here it is. One of the writers at Veterans Today is a long associate of Nathan Rothschild. So take this as gospel truth, which is supposedly true, or decide the whole thing is a story and means nothing. Let's try to use care. Prejudice filled out, at least filtered. So here it goes. The Rothschild family, according to a highly praised source, cut a deal 4 centuries ago with an unseen power. This power, he was told, according to the Rothschilds, is not evil, is not satanic or anything like it. They just came on entities somewhere in Germany long ago and agreed to help the family gain power, earthly dominion, if you will, in exchange for just a couple of things. Each male member of the family would, at age 25, go through a ceremony, investiture. Is that the word? So, this Rothschild or Goldsmith or whatever, perhaps young Bush, no proof of this, allows an unseen entity to enter them. This entity, as they tell it, lives outside time and space, has been on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years. And we have talked about, and people have seen, what happens in places like Skull and Bones in the school, where they're lying in a coffin. This is their story, as told by someone who was never supposed to pass it on. that there is no aspect of good or evil involved, only a deal to use their power and gifts of an unseen entity to create vibrations that feed their newfound friend. These vibrations are maximized through hate and suffering, not having anything to do with evil itself, but simply out of coincidence alone. We have seen them wearing masks, dancing in circles, debasing, murdering children, starting wars, running central banks. I see that as part of it. What is also supposed to be true is that these secret societies include the highest level of Freemasonry, all tossed around like internet candy that involves ceremonies like out of 1960 Hammer Studio films with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. ISIS is no more Islam than the murderers. They are no more Dominicans than the Christians, no more Kadassians. Well, Khazarians. They are not Jews. I don't make a case about Catholics, Jews, Zionists, Muslims here. The evidence out there says this is something else we deal with. So, what's it like having 100,000-year-old devil inside you? Would beheading hundreds, kidnapping, raping 20,000 women, dropping a nuclear bomb on a village in Yemen make sense then? To these people, and I use the term only reluctantly, who privately boast of hoisting real or imagined monstrosities right out of Captain Kirk Star Trek episode kind of stuff, feeding their familiars with vibes. We will go into stories about this in the next couple of weeks, and we will look at the Nazca lines and see the spider who feeds on vibration. I think this is the same story. Now, back in 2011, a CBS News poll asked American adults if they believed in invisible beings. 80% said yes. Most referred to angels, unspecific as to fallen or not, as to their no-seems of choice. In 1998, CBS New York Times poll had 63% of Americans believing in demonic possession as well. Then again, 2012 National Geographic poll has 77% of Americans believing aliens visited Earth. 2010 Reuters poll said 20% worldwide believe aliens live amongst us. 2013, 20% of Republicans voters believe Obama is the Antichrist. Same poll, 30% believe the world is ruled by secret societies. I don't know. I'm not ready to join these people. It is one thing to believe things for the common man, continually subjugated to mind control, minimally in the guise of news, which is entertainment only. If you watch the news, you can see the disclaimer at the end. But I further suspect, perhaps much further, that we've all seen things, that we all know there are things out there that we cannot define. what I can't say here as fact is that someone believes they have teamed up with beings that came to Earth while we were children. I mean, mankind in its infancy. And these beings have waited. There are more questions. If you accept any of this as true, if it's not true, and it may well not be true, then the power of suggestion itself may be the New World Order. That the insanity that we're seeing, that I think is obvious now, has been from the mercury we are breathing in. You know, when we see acts of vandalism, like in one day on April 10th, which seemed to be a day of burning worldwide, that totem poles all over Canada went up in flames, caught fire. When I was telling you our beliefs, that's ours. People from all over the world believe these are our ancestors. What is going on? Are these humans? And, you know, I don't like to point to was an alien because that seems like a cop-out to me. But in a world where domestic violence is leaving children traumatized, where people are being thrown off of reservations for marrying outside of their community, this had never happened before. Where women and children are in more danger at home than they are from walking in the streets. We have an emergency care system in Canada that is seeing more and more children beaten half to death in it from people who are supposed to be taking care of them. We have found more unmarked graves discovered in Indian schools all across Canada, all across the United States, but all across Europe too. If it's a church and it had your kids, they killed some of those kids. I would like to say that apartheid has never died. It has just moved on. Maybe gone underground. Is that easier to look at? You know, when we talked about the murder of 34 miners in South Africa by the cops, of course most of them shot in the back, it puts paid to the illusion of post-apartheid democracy, illuminates the new worldwide apartheid, of which South Africa is just historic and a contemporary model. In 1894, long before the infamous Afrikaners, whatever the word is, this spread all over the world. It is not gone. It is now part of all of us. Join me Thursday. We will continue.